The grand hall of Xavier International University shimmered in gold and silver, awash in soft music and the constant hum of fresh beginnings. String lights were woven through the rafters, spilling warm radiance down onto students, milling about in clusters, some awkward, some overly enthusiastic, all of them clutching paper cups and plastic utensils from the open food stations. The scent of grilled cheese sliders and cinnamon rolls lingered in the air, combining oddly with the subtle perfume of too many hopefuls trying too hard. Russel V. Marquez entered without ceremony, yet silence seemed to follow him in. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not forced, casual in his luxury. A sharp, black blazer hung effortlessly over a dark turtleneck. Slim slacks hugged long legs, and polished shoes clicked lightly on the hardwood. His hair was swept back neatly, his eyes scanning the room, not in search of anything, but in the detached way someone might inspect a scene they already owned. He didn't have to try. People noticed him whether he wanted them to or not. Students elbowed each other when they saw him. Some whispered. Others grinned too widely, fumbling with their phones for a discreet photo. Faculty smiled. Some even greeted him. Russel nodded faintly but didn't linger. This wasn't new. He didn't need anyone here. No one could surprise him. And then he saw him. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no spotlight, no slow-motion twist of fate, just a glance across the room, and suddenly, gravity shifted. A boy stood near one of the paper lanterns strung above a snack table, back turned, speaking with a girl, shorter than Russel, slight frame, slouched posture, black hoodie, sleeves tugged over his wrists, shoulders tense, like he wasn't used to crowds but was trying. He held a paper cup, delicately, fingertips just peeking from the cuffs. And he was laughing quietly, honestly at something the girl had said. She grinned back, her long hair swaying as she nudged him playfully. Russel couldn't hear the sound of his voice, but something about the curve of that half-hidden smile made the world hush around him. The boy didn't glow. He didn't command attention. He didn't even seem like he wanted to be there. But Russel's feet stilled. His breath paused. His eyes didn't move, because there was something wrong about what he was feeling. Something primal, irrational, like instinct had taken over and whispered, "You know him," when he was sure they'd never met. There was no explanation, just the faintest flicker of heat in his chest, the kind that usually only followed the end of a fight or the beginning of a very good kiss. Russel didn't believe in love at first sight. This wasn't that. This was something else. Possession? Recognition? Need. A name floated up in his mind like it had always been there. Jirren. It didn't make sense. He'd never seen him before. He was sure of it. But something about that silhouette, that laugh like wind rustling dry leaves, felt old, felt remembered, felt dangerous. And then the boy turned. Not fast, not in panic, just casually lifting his chin, brushing the fringe of his dark hair back from his forehead, eyes sweeping the room like someone bored and trying not to look too obvious about it. And those eyes, they should have widened. They should have paused. They should have done something. Russel braced for it, the inevitable recognition. That moment, every other person gave him when their gaze caught, when their spine straightened, when their voice faltered. That unconscious pull, that magnetic, involuntary jolt of, "Oh, it's you." He waited for it. But it never came. The boy looked past him, right through him, and walked by. No pause. No glance, no flicker of recognition, nothing. Jirren's shoulder brushed the edge of Russel's sleeve as he moved around him, careful not to bump into anyone. His expression didn't change. He didn't stiffen. He didn't flush. He didn't see Russel. Or maybe he saw him too clearly. Russel blinked. His breath hitched for a second. He turned, following the boy's quiet retreat with his eyes. He watched him rejoin the girl Naya, if he remembered her name right, and tuck himself into her orbit like it was natural. Like he belonged somewhere Russel didn't. Like Russel was nobody. The moment was a ripple. Barely a second. But something inside Russel split. He didn't understand it. He didn't like it. Because Jirren Lane wasn't supposed to exist. And Yeth did. And worse? He didn't care that Russel did too. Russel was used to reactions. This wasn't one. Russel stood beside the drinks table, a half-filled glass of fruit punch in hand, the condensation dripping slowly down his fingers. Around him, the world was warm and glittering. The overhead lights swayed gently with the air conditioning, casting fleeting shadows across the room. Students milled about in waves of color, smiling too brightly, laughing too loudly, reaching for connection like they were all drowning. He'd been to dozens of university welcome events. They were all the same, different venue, different year, same pointless introductions and sugar-coated speeches. He always stood on the periphery, amused and unbothered, letting people come to him. They always did. Russel didn't chase. He didn't need to. Until now. His eyes weren't scanning the crowd. Not anymore. They were fixed on one figure across the room. Jirren, the boy who hadn't looked at him. The boy without fanfare, or in 10th ad, reduced Russel to a stranger in a space he usually ruled. Jirren was speaking to another student now. Not flirting, not laughing too loudly, or trying to stand out, just existing, quietly, like still water beneath a storm. He stood half-shadowed near the refreshments table, far from the crowd that gathered around the club booths. His voice didn't rise above the hum, but his presence pulled Russel's gaze like a magnet. A strange stillness wrapped around him, like the noise of the room bent around his silence. Russel watched as Jirren shifted his weight from one foot to the other, tucking the long sleeves of his hoodie tighter over his hands. His head tilted slightly as the person beside him spoke, some freshman with wild hair and too many bracelet sand. Jirren nodded, eyes warm but unreadable. It wasn't shyness. It wasn't nervousness. It was control, deliberate, contained. "What are you hiding?" Russel thought, fingers tightening around his cup. "Yo, you spaced out again," said a voice beside him. Russel didn't turn. He didn't need to. He recognized the lazy cadence. Colin, his roommate, always sounded like he was half laughing at the world. Colin nudged him. "You see someone cute or just planning world domination?" Russel didn't answer. Colin followed his gaze. "Ah," he said, low and entertained. "The one in the hoodie?" Russel still didn't speak. "That's the guy who walked past you earlier, right? No bow, no gasp, no eye contact. Just a full-on, I don't know you moment." Colin grinned, sipping from his soda. "Bet that bruised your soul." Russel didn't rise to the bait. He was still watching. The conversation across the room had shifted. Jirren smiled faintly at something the other student said, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then without warning, he glanced around the room, scanning the space lazily. Russel froze. Their eyes almost met. Almost. But Jirren's gaze stopped a few feet short. He turned his head back and adjusted his cup, attention redirected entirely. Still no reaction. Russel's chest tightened. Not with hurt, not with embarrassment, with interest. Fixation. A crack had formed in the center of his universe and it had a name. "Why him?" Colin asked, leaning on the table with a smirk. "You've been eye-fucking him for 15 minutes. What's the draw?" Russel finally answered, voice low. "He didn't look at me." "That's it?" Russel turned his glass in his hand. Droplets trailed down the sides like sweat on skin. "That's everything," Colin laughed. "You're unhinged." But Russel wasn't listening. His mind replayed every frame of the moment. Jirren walking past him like he was air. Like he didn't matter. Like Russel v. Marquez was just another shadow in a room full of forgettable faces. It was the first time in years someone hadn't tried to impress him, hadn't stolen glances, hadn't adjusted their posture or fiddled with their hair. Russel wasn't arrogant. He didn't need to be. Attention just came to him. He didn't chase it, didn't even crave it. But being ignored, being unseen, that stirred something else entirely. A crackle at the base of his spine. A voice that said, "Mine. He's not like them." The crowd shifted again, and Jirren began walking toward the far hallway, slipping into the back of the venue. Not in a hurry, just done. Russel took a step forward, then another. Colin laughed again behind him. "Here we go." But Russel didn't care. He needed to get closer, to understand. No one ignored him unless they had a reason, and no one walked away unless they were already hiding. He followed at a distance, blending with the crowd. Jirren didn't look back. He weaved between students like a ghost, glancing at posters on the wall, sipping from his now empty cup. Russel tracked his movements with surgical precision. 10 steps behind. No closer. No faster. Jirren stopped by a display near the staircase, a collage of club photos and orientation banners. He stared at it for a moment, unreadable. Russel could see the line of his jaw now, the way the shadows kissed his cheekbones, the faint tremble of his fingers as he crumpled his cup and tossed it into the trash. He looked tired, but not fragile. He looked like someone who'd bled and sealed the wound shut with silence. What are you running from? Russel thought again. Jirren turned and started walking again, vanishing into the hallway near the gym entrance. And for the first time since his arrival, Russel hesitated. This wasn't a game, not anymore. Because something had shifted deep in his chest, and it wasn't just curiosity, it was awareness. That electric, undeniable knowledge that Jirren Lane was different, that he carried something buried beneath his calm exterior, something wounded, sharp, and impossibly magnetic. Russel wanted to peel it back, to see what made him crack, to hear him speak his name finally with something other than silence. And then, he wanted to break that silence, make him react, flinch, need. Because this wasn't just about being ignored. It wasn't just about control. It wasn't even about pride. It was about the pull, the gravity between two bodies that had never met but somehow remembered each other anyway. Russel clenched his jaw, running a hand through his hair. The heat in his chest had grown. It wasn't lust. Not yet. It wasn't love. Not even close. It was something more primal, more instinctive. A feeling that whispered low in his bones and demanded possession. The lights in the grand hall dimmed slightly, casting a golden glow over the assembled crowd. The laughter, chatter, and clinking of plastic cups dulled as the event host, a bright-eyed senior, with a megaphone voice and far too much enthusiasm, stepped onto the small stage beside the welcome banner. "All right, everyone," she called out, a microphone in hand. "Let's break the ice a little more, shall we? We're doing a quick mixer game." Groans and cheers rose unevenly from the room. The new students were split between nerves and curiosity. Russel stood near the back, hands tucked in his pockets, jaw tight. He didn't usually participate in these things. Most times, his presence alone was enough to exempt him. Professors didn't press him, hosts didn't insist, students didn't dare. But tonight was different. His eyes weren't scanning the crowd. They were trained on one person, Jirren Lane, that same boy in the black hoodie, sleeves bunched at the wrists, lips set in a passive line. He stood near the bookshelf by the exit, almost blending into the background, if not for the stark contrast between his stillness and everyone else's movement. Russel had been watching him all evening, a quiet observer in a room full of noise. Jirren didn't belong here, and that made him even more captivating. The host's voice rose again. "Here's how it works. You have 2 minutes to find someone you haven't talked to yet. Introduce yourself. Ask them 2 questions. No clicks. No best friends. Just strangers meeting strangers." The lights shifted again, and upbeat music started playing softly overhead. Russel moved. He didn't question it. His body simply reacted. Every part of him honed in, a predator with a fixed target. He crossed the room, students parting without him needing to say a word. His posture was calm but deliberate, the set of his shoulders loose but focused. His footsteps silent against the floor. Jirren hadn't moved. He stood half-turned, staring down at his half-full cup, lost in thought or in avoidance. Russel couldn't be sure. And then, just as Russel reached him, Jirren stepped aside. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't rushed. It was precise, measured, as if he had felt Russel coming from behind and chose, in that very second, to remove himself from his path. Russel's hand hovered midair. He hadn't even spoken yet when Jirren turned his head and smiled faintly at a boy to his left. A wide-eyed, soft-featured junior who stood nervously near the fruit punch table. "Hi," Jirren said to the boy. Soft, casual, no performance, no hesitation. The boy blinked in surprise, clearly flattered by the attention. "Hey, I'm Micah." "Jirren," he replied. Russel stood there, frozen. Jirren hadn't so much as acknowledged him, hadn't glanced at him, hadn't even offered a nod of greeting. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't confusion. It was intentional. He knew Russel was there, and he chose someone else. The rejection wasn't loud, but it was deafening. Russel stopped mid-stride. Heat crawled up the back of his neck, slow and burning, like a cigarette pressed to skin. He turned slightly, just enough to look like he'd been heading in another direction all along, and found an empty spot near the window. He stood there, drink untouched, fists clenched just enough to feel his pulse thudding in his palms. From the edge of the room, he watched Jirren. Watched the way his expression didn't change when Micah spoke. Watched the way he nodded, polite and attentive, as Micah asked him something stupid about electives. Watched the way his lips barely parted in response, the words not meant to impress, just to pass the time. And yet, somehow, it was captivating. There was no spark in the conversation, no fire, no laughter, but there was intimacy in Jirren's quietness, an intentional silence, a space he built around himself like armor, and the fact that Russel wasn't allowed inside it, it burned. No one had ever denied him presence before. No one had stepped aside like he was nothing. And what made it worse? Jirren hadn't done it with anger, or disgust, or even defiance. He had done it with indifference, as if Russel didn't exist. Russel's jaw flexed. He wasn't used to this, to being excluded, to being invisible. He didn't crave attention, he despised it, most days, but this was different. This wasn't someone failing to notice him. This was someone choosing not to, deliberately, coldly. And for the first time in a very long time, Russel felt his pride twist into something foreign. Not fury, not pain, something uglier, deeper. It slithered down his spine and planted itself in his chest. A dark, quiet hunger to be seen, to be recognized, to make Jirren look at him, to make him flinch, gasp, react, to break that maddening stillness that held him so far out of reach. Russel's fingers curled tighter around his glass until the plastic dented slightly under the pressure. He should have walked away, should have found someone else and followed the rules of the stupid game. But he didn't. He stood there, watching, silent, trying to understand why the quietest boy in the room had just silenced him without a single word. And Russel hated how it made him feel. The event had begun to wane. The lights in the university hall dimmed to a softer gold, and the crowd had thinned out into hushed conversations and cliques forming in corners. Plates were left half full on tables, drinks melted into sticky puddles, and the music had dulled to ambient beats that throbbed more gently through the walls. Russel leaned against a column near the back exit, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the last flickers of movement like a hunter watching a dying fire. His eyes weren't on the stage, where the host was congratulating club leaders for another successful orientation. They weren't on the laughing students who exchanged phone numbers and took group selfies under the lanterns. His gaze was trained on the far glass doors, on the terrace just beyond them, on him. Jirren stood with one shoulder leaned against the railing, the moonlight framing him in a silver outline. One hand held a can of soda sweeting. In the evening humidity, the other lazily scrolled his phone. The blue light painted his features in cool shadow, accentuating the sharp line of his nose, the curve of his lips, the quiet, deliberate stillness that had haunted Russel for hours. There was no one else around him. No Naya, no Junior, no crowd. Just him, the silence, and the night breeze threading through his hair. Russel's breath caught. It had been hours since Jirren had walked past him without a glance, since he'd stepped out of Russel's reach and introduced himself to someone else like it was second nature to ignore him. It should have faded by now. That spark of insult, that twist of irritation, that need. But it hadn't. If anything, it had sharpened. Russel pushed off the column and walked forward. Not fast, not hesitant, just measured. He knew how to approach, how to make an entrance without words, how to fold silence into power. His footsteps barely registered on the polished floor. His fingers were loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. But inside, something boiled. Each step closer to the terrace felt like entering a ring, a match he hadn't agreed to, but one he couldn't walk away from. The doors opened without resistance, and the air shifted around him. Jirren didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the screen in his hand, thumb flicking lazily up as if time didn't matter. Russel stood behind him for half a second, then a full second. The moon caught in Jirren's hair like frost. His lashes cast shadows onto his cheeks. The wind caught the edges of his hoodie sleeve and made them flutter slightly, like even the air was allowed closer than Russel was. Russel's throat tightened. "Hey," he said finally, the words slipping out smoother than he expected. Nothing. No flinch, no jolt, no startled turn like so many others gave him. Just a slow blink, a breath, a tilt of the head so subtle it may have been imagined. Then Jirren lowered his phone. Not quickly, not rudely, just calmly, and without a word, without a glance. He turned and walked away. Not hurried, not cold, just disinterested, as though Russel was a tree, a lamppost, a passerby at most. No confrontation, no irritation, no challenge, just distance. And it hit harder than any insult could have. Russel stood still, watching the spot where Jirren had been, the shadow of him retreating down the stone path that led back toward the dormitory towers. The knight didn't make a sound, neither did he. He didn't move, didn't follow, didn't speak, only watched, only felt. A tight, burning twist settled low in his guttone he hadn't felt in years. Not rejection, not jealousy, not even rage. It was displacement. Like someone had shifted the entire world's axis without warning and left him standing slightly off-center. How dare he? Not in words, but in movement, in silence. In the easy way he left, like Russel had never been part of the space, like he didn't matter. Russel clenched his jaw, molars grinding tight enough to ache. He should have called after him, asked him what his problem was, confronted him, demanded something that acknowledged Russel's presence, but he didn't, because even that would have given Jirren something he didn't deserve: power. Russel exhaled sharply and turned his gaze up to the sky. The stars were blurred by city glow. The wind carried the soft murmur of distant voices, laughter fading as students left the venue one by one, but none of it reached him. His mind replayed the moment, the simple, clean exit. No scorn, no bite, just absence. And that was worse. It was calculated. Russel had lived his whole life being noticed, watched, admired, feared. Even when people hated him, they looked. But Jirren? He looked past him. He looked through him. He denied him the one thing everyone gave freely without question. And he did it with ease. And Russel's pride twists into something darker. The dorm room was quiet, lit only by the soft amber glow of a desk lamp on the far side. Outside, the sounds of campus life were fading footsteps down hallways, distant laughter, a door slamming shut somewhere in the building. Inside, Russel paced, back and forth, back again. His arms were crossed tight over his chest, his head lowered, brow furrowed deep like he was trying to solve an equation too complicated for words. His jaw clenched, relaxed, clenched again. Colin lounged on the top bunk, legs hanging off the side, a half-eaten bag of chips balanced on his chest. His phone buzzed with messages, but he didn't bother checking. His attention was fixed on his roommate, who looked less like a man and more like a storm being bottled. "You're wearing out the floor," Colin said lazily, voice laced with amusement. Russel didn't stop, didn't look up, didn't speak for another full lap. Then, finally barely above a whisper, he muttered, "He's not like the others." That made Colin pause. He sat up straighter, raising an eyebrow. "Who? The boy who ghosted you in real time?" Russel halted mid-step. His hands dropped to his sides. He didn't laugh, didn't smirk, didn't react at all, save for the slight twitch of his jaw. "He looked right through me," Russel said, voice flat. "Like I didn't matter. Like I wasn't even real." Colin whistled low. "Oof, that's gotta sting." Russel didn't deny it, didn't deflect, just stood there, still, breathing slow and deep like he was anchoring himself in the moment. Colin swung his legs back and forth. "Okay, I'll bite. What's the deal with this guy? He say something? Reject you? Kick your puppy?" Russel turned to the desk and dropped heavily into the chair, fingers raking through his hair. "No, that's the thing. He said nothing. He did nothing." Colin blinked. "You're spiraling over a guy who didn't speak to you?" Russell's eyes darkened. "That's exactly why I can't stop thinking about him." Silence fell again. Colin leaned over the bunk rail. "Okay, spill. Who is he?" "Freshman," Russel said. "Name's Jirren Lane." Colin's brows lifted. "Lane? That quiet guy? Hoodie boy?" Russel nodded. "Damn," Colin muttered. "Didn't peg you for the mysterious and introspective type." Russel ignored the jab. "I feel a strong connection with him," he murmured, his voice lower now, closer to the chest, raw in a way Colin wasn't used to hearing. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I want him to notice me. I want him to smile at me. I want him to stop avoiding me, his hand clenched on the desk. I want to be at his side. Colin raised both eyebrows now, setting the chips aside. Whoa, man, you're in trouble. He grinned. You fell hard for that boy. And take note, that boy doesn't show any interest in you, man. Russel slowly turned his head, eyes gleaming not with embarrassment, but fire, obsession, certainty. I'll make him notice me, he said, voice like velvet over steel. I'll make him fall, so hard he won't know how to breathe without me beside him. Colin let out a laugh, shaking his head. God, you're crazy. Russel didn't deny it, didn't blink, didn't smile. He just leaned forward, fingers steepled, gaze distant and dangerous. Colin just laughed at his crazy-in-love friend. The night wasn't quiet anymore. Russel sat on the bench outside his dorm building, leg bouncing as his fingers tapped a steady rhythm on his thigh. The stars were out, but he couldn't see them. Not really. His vision was filled with something else. Someone else. Jirren. The name had haunted him before he even knew it. A boy, cloaked in silence. Someone who existed like he shouldn't, with the ability to make Russel feel both invisible and entirely seen without so much as a word. And now, that silence was unbearable. Russel pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. There was a name there. Ray, registrar. He hesitated only for a moment before he typed, Russel, you still owe me a favor. It took less than a minute before the reply came. Ray, depends what kind of favor. Russel, I need the freshman enrollment list for business majors. Just names. Now, there was a pause. Ray, that's technically confidential, you know. Russell's jaw tightened. Russell, and technically, I helped you erase that warning from your academic file last semester. Ray, touché. Sending it now. Don't tell me you're stalking someone. Russell, don't worry. I already am. 3 minutes later, a PDF dropped into his inbox. Russell opened it immediately. His heart beat louder than it should have, thudding in his ears like a war drum. He scrolled quickly. Dozens of names blurred past. Until there. Lane, Jirren freshman, business management. ID, 2,150,417. Russell froze. He stared at the name until the letters lost meaning. Until his chest felt tight. Until the sound around him dissolved into static. Jirren Lane. Of course it would be that name. Of course it would feel right too right. Like it belonged in his mouth, in his head. Like it had been waiting to attach itself to him. Lane. A name that sounded like distance. Like a road. Like something you followed down to the end. And Jirren. Something about it felt placed, as if fate had planted it deliberately in his path, with all its syllables dressed in calm, calculated indifference. Russell tilted his head back, letting the cool air sting his cheeks. There was no mistaking it now. That boy wasn't just some freshman who walked past him. He was a wound in Russell's pride, an ache in his mind, a question with no answer, and that had always been Russell's greatest weakness. He needed to know more. He needed to know everything. His thumbs moved fast, fingers pulling up the university's internal portal on his phone. His student council access gave him privileges most didn't have. Search. Lane. Jirren. No dorm assignment listed. Likely off campus or private housing. No photos on file. No social media links. No extracurricular affiliations. No disciplinary record. Just silence. Again. Like the boy lived in the gaps of things. The corners of rooms. The footnotes of reality. Like he wasn't supposed to be seen. Russell stared harder. It was infuriating. He opened a second opone of his own private tools. A network tracker designed by a friend in IT. Something he only used when he really needed to know more. A few minutes and a backdoor code later, he pulled what little he could. Jirren's high school transcripts, pristine. SAT scores, above average. No club memberships, no blog history, no tagged posts, nothing scandalous, nothing wild, just too clean, too invisible, too untraceable. Russell's knuckles whitened as he gripped his phone. It didn't make sense. He was used to people, their patterns, their rhythms. Everyone had tell smiles, nervous habits, ways they moved around him when they wanted attention. But Jirren? Jirren didn't want to be seen, and somehow, that made him impossible not to. Russel's mind replayed every second from the welcome night, every blink, every pause, every step Jirren took away from him, the calm way he'd left the terrace, the absence of hesitation in his movements. He didn't just ignore Russel, he had calculated it. Russel rubbed his jaw, mind racing. This was wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He was always the one who chose, who decided when and if someone mattered, who gave his attention as sparingly as a god. But now, he was orbiting someone else's gravity. Someone who didn't even look at him. He hated it. He hated how much he wanted to fix it, to bend it, to make Jirren see him. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Colin. "You good? You vanished after the event." Russel didn't respond. He couldn't. Not now. He was slipping down a hole, and the only way out was through him, through Jirren. He would need to find a way to intersect with Jirren's schedule. Not too obvious, not too soon, but close enough. He needed an excuse. A shared class? A club appearance? Something. Anything. Because this wasn't infatuation. It was war. A war of silence. And Russel didn't lose wars. He stared at the name again. Lane. Jirren. It sounded too destined, too aligned. And somewhere, deep inside his chest somewhere, he never let anyone touch. A strange coldness crawled in. A whisper. A growl. A voice that sounded like it came from under his skin. "You're not supposed to exist.